Now, moving back to English, as I was saying, Daryl still can't join us because of some health questions. I wanted to give you the cue to introduce yourselves because I think you will be able to give a more extensive background to your job and what you do in your companies. So please, okay. Mark, you can start.
Yeah. I'm Mark from Headup. We're a German indie publisher. We've been around since 10 years now, so we're actually having an anniversary next year. And yeah, we're doing a lot of indie publishing, like in the worldwide market, currently focusing a bit on consoles and PC. And yeah, I'm the CTO there, so I'm heading like the internal development team there because we're doing a lot of porting for external teams to bring their games to consoles.
I'm Kiron Ramdewar. I work as a game producer at Playstack. We're a publisher. We're based in Soho, just in London. And we publish games that really vary. We do everything from mobile free-to-play all the way through to premium console. And we do everything from kind of development funding all the way through to kind of marketing. And we try and fill the gaps that any developers have.
Okay, great. As I was telling you, I wanted to talk about the new trends in indie games in the terms of design, genres, games that will be in trend, in your opinion, in the next months or years. But this industry is very news-driven, and just a few days ago, Epic Games announced that they are going to release their own store. And that by itself is a new trend. And we have to discuss that, because it doesn't come out of the blue or in a sort of trivial context. As you might have realized, Steam has changed something in their inner working, and indie games have been losing visibility more and more for the past months. So a new player entering the arena is great news in the sense that, at the very least, it's challenging the monopoly of Steam in digital stores, which is interesting because it's not the first digital store trying to face Steam, but it's the first one that has something big enough to drive traffic by itself. Humble Bundle is big, sure. GOG is big, sure. But compared to Steam, they are like this, they are tiny. Because they, in my opinion, because they didn't have something big enough to drive the initial traffic to get momentum. But Epic Games has Fortnite. They have something that can drive millions of people in the first days. So this is potentially game-changing for the industry. What's your take on this? And you can interrupt and fight each other at will.
So I think it's really great that there's going to be kind of new platforms or stores, whichever you want to call them, that are going to be vying for a good slice of the Steam pie. It's kind of been the case for however long that there is one king of PC stores. And like you're saying, it's a monopoly that's been established for however long. Stuff that Epic are doing with kind of better revenue shares for developers and things like that, I think are only going to help increase the amount of traffic going through there and the amount of developers. And if you watched the Games Awards show last night, the amount of announcements that were done geared towards the Epic store was pretty substantial, and they'd got some big shots there. And like you're saying, one of the problems was when something like GOG tried to do something, they didn't really have like a platform basis that was really going to like pull people in or like drive developers with as much passion, I think, as something like the revenue shares and the things that Epic are doing. I think it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years to see how the market fragments out and who kind of pulls out on top. You can already Steam is already trying to start to sweeten the deals for developers to try and improve things for some of the bigger guns. And I think there's definitely more of a push from when I've gone to events like this and a few other ones where people are trying to almost make something like the Netflix of gaming. And I think that is going to be a really big push. You can see it with Xbox Game Pass and what they're doing there, where the idea of a subscription model and those platform holders kind of pulling in developers to join those are kind of really enticing to work on. So for me, I think the whole marketplace is going to go through a lot of change within the next couple of years. I think eventually we will move into a kind of more again, like Netflix model where it's a subscription-based thing, which I think is great for consumers. I think from a developer side, it should be better for getting investment into developers' hands as well from the get-go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So there've been quite a few stores popping up in the last couple of months. So for example, Discord did their own store, Congregate did with Cartridge. But we feel that Epic definitely has the reach to really get this going. So with all their Fortnite audience and so on, and the money they currently have on their bank, and not really knowing to do what to do with it. And yeah, we feel it's going to be like a really great chance for indie developers especially, and also to make Steam like think about their current system that they have, because like this 30-70 split they currently have, they're already like pushing that up a little bit at the moment for bigger teams. But with that 88 split that Epic is doing, Steam might think about their current system, and yeah, we feel it could be a really big player in the future. But it's hard. I mean, there've been quite a few stores that tried to do that in the last couple of years, and nobody really succeeded. But yeah, we feel that, especially due to the announcement they already did, it's like a really, really good start.
But I think this new Epic Games store, whatever the name is that they put in the last minute, faces a significant challenge, in my opinion. And that is that they need to separate Epic as a brand from the store as a brand, the same way that Valve did back in the day. Back then they were mostly known as developers. And they were building upon the success of Counter-Strike and Half-Life and Left 4 Dead, fine. But their competitors felt safe going into their store, even though they were competing against the games that they were selling as a first party. And that's not easy to achieve, because they will need to go to the PUBG guys and tell them, hey, even though we are the guys who make Fortnite, this will be a fair competition. We are not going to favor our own products. And that's kind of a challenge, don't you think?
It's going to be a challenge to like convince especially the big players to get on their platform. But I think, especially due to the way smaller revenue cut they get, they might have good arguments. And yeah, also for the development teams and publishers who are currently doing their own stores, it might be like a good situation to think about. Oh well, it's quite an effort to build up our own platforms. So if there's like good competition already out there, we can just like utilize them to sell our games. I think, but that's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a big challenge for them to kind of cement themselves on the marketplace. But even since they kind of announced that they were doing their store, the amount of developers that have come to talk to me and they've already said, hey, Epic are doing this new store, and the one thing that it always comes back to is, look at the revenue share that we're going to get here compared to Steam. Now, this isn't saying that Steam are going to completely get frozen out, and I think as a publisher or a developer, you still need to keep Steam in mind. It is still the big dog, and Epic isn't like fully cemented yet. But I think that is going to be a giant pull for people to come over, and kind of reiterating what you're saying earlier, having the content there is mainly where these stores have been bottlenecked and where they've not been able to expand and become kind of a driving force within the industry. And I think maybe it's like a smart move for them initially, and fees will change and things like that, but I think for now they've done a very smart move of ensuring that it's a very lucrative deal to get that content into their store, to then make sure the numbers are there, to make sure that it is a big enough deal that in the consumer's standpoint, it's somewhere you would go to look for games.
Imagine one of the devs you're working with, comes to you now and say, hey, we are considering transitioning to Unreal Engine just because they are promising extra benefits for this new store. Do you think it's worth now to try to be one of the first studios to be in getting these benefits?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the store without being on Unreal, so there are some benefits that you gain when you're on Unreal, but I think it doesn't really make sense just because of those like pretty tiny benefits to really like change all your development systems and swap the engine, because it's a huge effort to do that. So I don't think it makes sense to switch the engine just because the owner of that store is like the owner of the engine.
Yeah, kind of the same feeling there. If you're early into development, like really early, and you kind of have knowledge on both, I would say then, yeah, maybe it's worthwhile switching. But otherwise, if you're halfway into development, it's, what, 5% that will be waived by going onto Unreal and going via the Epic Store. So I would never want to tell a development team halfway through to kind of redo all of that work for a different engine, because it's a bit of a nightmare.
And let's think about Steam. What's Valve going to do? Because there's this famed Valve time that they don't change. They geologically shift. It is so slow that it's like a tectonic move. But I guess that they now have to move things more, faster. Maybe this shift to give more advantages to big players, big companies, that we've seen in the past few months have seen actually their first response to this new store. I'm not sure, but what do you think Valve should do to, or what do you think they will do to answer to this new competition? Because indie games right now are screwed in Steam.
So for me, the biggest problem that I have with publishing stuff on Steam, or the challenge that everyone seems to have, is making sure that content is curated, and that the best content, the best games out there, are surfacing in like the featured slots and the places that are really going to help you as a developer to sell your title. And I think that kind of manual moderation is going to be really core to making sure that developers are still on board and that they're still kind of viable and applicable and still kind of keeping up with the market. I think that's one of the big things that Epic are probably working on, to ensure that that developers want to work with them. There's too many good games, like you're saying, like indie titles that go onto Steam, and if you've not already got a name for yourself, or if you've not got really lucky or had a great marketing plan, that just kind of get left by the sideway. So for me, that making sure that content's curated and the rev share are going to be the two things that cut. I think for the big players, the reason why they cut it was kind of like to initially try and buffer out what the Epic Store's doing. But I think they're obviously playing their cards close to their chest, and they don't want to start making a lot of wide, sweeping things that will affect their revenue and completely change the infrastructure until they can see how these other stores are going to impact their sales.
Yeah, I think in regards to indie games on Steam, they are probably not going back to like the early days where they curated like all the content, because there's basically simply too much content on there, and I think they are really happy with like the algorithmic approach that they are currently having. So I don't think that they are going to get back, but more focus on like the big players, as they are obviously also doing with the revenue cut share. And yeah, I think it's going to take some time for Steam to see what the Epic Store is doing, if they are doing it differently, because we actually don't really know yet how Epic is going to like curate the stuff on the store and to how they're going to place indie games in there. So maybe they are having the same approach, and it's like all algorithmic based, and your game is only like placed in the top positions if you already are successful. So we're not sure how's that going to influence Steam on that side. But yeah, hopefully for example on the revenue cut side, it's like really easy to compare, and yeah, maybe they are going to move quickly there.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of cause and effect, right? If all of a sudden the marketplace starts shifting towards one way, Steam's hand will be forced to kind of change their procedures and the way things are set up at the moment. But like I'm saying, I think for now they're kind of holding back and waiting to see if things start shifting before they make any kind of major changes that will affect, I think, the majority of people publishing on the platform.
Now moving on a little bit from this debate between Steam and other platforms or whatever, that's actually the question of maybe computers should stop being the default platform for indie games. I mean, if competition is so fierce on Steam and visibility is so hard to get, maybe indies should try to move on to consoles where content is more curated and platforms keep more control over what's published there. Am I on something here, or?
I definitely feel really strongly about publishing on both console and PC. I think if your game lends itself well to working on a console and you've got the bandwidth or you can get the funding to help you do that, it's something that you should do. And building those relationships with platform holders, Sony, Xbox, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo can really help propel a game and give it the success it needs. There's been titles before that maybe haven't sold as well on PC until they've launched on consoles, and then it's helped propel them the other way. And because Steam is so easy to put games onto, it kind of does mean that you get buried a lot of the time beneath other things, no matter how good your game is. Whereas on console, because it is a lot more curated as well, you do tend to get a lot more direct one-to-one with kind of account managers and things like that, where you can lock down things like featuring sets, along with kind of what other promotional materials they'll give you, whether it be blogs, videos, whether you're going to announce at a game show and things like that. And there's definitely been a push in the last, I'd say since this generation, for the console platforms to really push indie titles, as they saw, like I'd say, like 7 years ago, they saw the amount of money coming through on PC for some of these titles, and then they realized we really need to do something for indie developers on consoles. So stuff like ID Xbox, PlayStation, like you can see PlayStation have quite a big thing here for like their like student indie section, which I think is brilliant. But all of those are clear efforts for them to push indie titles on their platform. So I think it's always worth looking into.
Yeah, it's the same for us. So for us at Headup, multi-platform is like key to make a title successful for several reasons. So first, if you have a title that's only coming to PC, it's like really hard to get the press interested in it. And if you have a title that it's a press release stating, oh, this is coming for PC, Switch, Xbox, and PS4, it's like people are getting more into it and seeing that it's like probably a bigger title. And yeah, it's just about spreading the risk. So we have had a couple of titles that done really poor on PC, and then we put it out on Xbox, and it did quite well. And later on, we put it out on Switch, and it did like really good. So yeah, nowadays it's quite easy. So it's not easy, but it's way easier than like a couple of years before to really put out a game on all the consoles, especially if you're using Unity or Unreal. So it's definitely worth to plan that from the very beginning to be on all the consoles. And there are a lot of partners that can really help with that. So a lot of like teams that are really focusing on porting games over to all the platforms. You just send them the code, and then they get like a small revenue cut or something, and you can push it out on all the platforms. And even on Switch, the visibility is getting harder and harder as well, because there are a lot of titles, but still on Xbox and PS4 and also on Switch, it's definitely worth it.
I think if you had asked people, especially like a year ago, just when the Switch had just come out, if you could have your indie game right now on Switch, would you have done it and put the money into? I think most developers would have bitten your hand off, and it kind of shows the importance of having your game on consoles and the difference that it can make. I think it was like Super Meat Boy launched quite soon after the Switch launched, and I think it was within the week they said that they made more money on their Switch release than they did on their Xbox release, which is insane for the amount of time that it was out. But I think it just goes to show the power of making sure that you are aligned with the different platforms.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to the original plan that I had for the talk, let's talk about the trends for the indie games industry in the near future. Thing is that analysts, market analysts, and journalists, and so on, are experts in predicting the past. And that means that usually when there's an analyst talking about the market, what he's doing or she's doing is talking about what's going on and what happened and why. But they are not so good at predicting what is going to happen. But that's pretty much what you do on a daily basis. You're betting on games becoming all the rage in the near future, what do you have in mind apart from your instinct when you're looking for a game and you're trying to decide if it's going to be a hit or not?
Yeah, you can like look at similar titles at the moment that have basically the same quality and see how those games performed. So as an example, a couple of years back, like puzzle platformers were like really successful, and nowadays they are still really successful, but it's like 2 out of 100 puzzle platform games, which are really, really high quality. All of them are successful. So for us, for example, puzzle platformers are really, really hard to commit on, because we know that there's so much quality in the market, and it's just like a lottery to compete with them. And yeah, you just have to look at what is working right now, also what is coming up in the next couple of months that you already has like a hype. So that's also important to like watch in the future, but what is also already generating a hype. Yeah, that's what we're doing, but it's still a lot about like gut feeling. In the industry, it's like a lot of gut feeling.
Yeah, it's really hard to pinpoint like a genre that you could say and you got to think development times in like a year or two's time, this is going to be the like next hot thing. I do think the kind of blue ocean is definitely on mobile. Sorry, not mobile. It's definitely on like creative kind of games that let you kind of create your own area or create your own games almost. So that's talking stuff like Dreams, Minecraft, things like that, because they essentially give players a longevity, a long period for them to create their own fun in the game. But obviously making those building blocks and those kind of stories and experiences for people are extremely hard. I think multiplayer, obviously, you can see it in the last 5 to 10 years has absolutely exploded. And you can see the amount of money that games companies are making through really good core multiplayer games. And there's definitely a big shift, I think, now onto games with live ops. So I think Ubisoft has done a great thing here with making sure that games that maybe haven't been as successful as they'd like at launch have a really long tail to them, and that they can maybe even improve sales through like a 2 to 5 year periods. They can make sure that they're kind of upticking on a lot of those. So I think games as a service is really going to become a big thing. But I just generally think, if you think about gaming on a whole, we're in quite an early stage. Like, what, like 20, 30 years, I'd say, before it's even like a household thing. So we're very early stages. And I think the market is going to get more fragmented with people that do just want to do multiplayer games, people that want core single-player games. I mean, I think it was a couple of years ago, people saying single player's dying off, but then all it takes is a few games to come out to then prove that, you know, you get another Red Dead Redemption or something. I know it's got multiplayer, and then that absolutely sells like crazy and proves all of those analysts that have said that single player is kind of dying wrong. So I think multiplayer and live ops is kind of where it's at if you're looking for crazy, insane money. And I think there's going to be a lot more development into that, but it's really hard to tell, in all honesty.
How's the game that you're looking for right now? I mean, the kind of game that will make you twitch your ears and say, hoo-hoo.
Yeah, so for us at
And don't tell me a good one.
So if you can tell me what game that is, I'd love it.
Yeah.
Like,
I'll tell you later.
Yeah, we try to like find, as you already said, games that that really make the player create stuff and talk about it. So like being creative, sharing your creations with your friends, and like really, yeah, like I wouldn't call it like social games, but games that you really love to talk about, and like that the community is building up by themselves because the people are so happy about what they created in the game. So, but we're not really only focused on that. So we're also doing like super single player experiences with like a narrative focus, because yeah, there's so much going on and so many great games that are worth like being treated well. But yeah, if we ask people for something. It's more like this creative, like social experience.
Yeah, so kind of shadowing what you said there, we're just looking for great games, and I think that can happen in all sorts of these different genres. And I think when I was saying, sorry, creative games, I wasn't necessarily saying like building games like Minecraft. I'm more talking about games where players make their own stories. So that can be anything from like a Monster Hunter through to a Minecraft, right? Something that when you play it, you have a story and you go and you talk to your friends after and go, oh my lord, I just smashed through this dragon from this thing while I was playing with my friend over here, and he did X thing to like blow up a barrel when he hit the ground. And that's super powerful, because without you having to kind of market it yourself, the players and the people that are engaging with your game are the people that are helping to expand your audience as well. But I think other than that, I wouldn't want to say that that's all we're looking for. I think that is the kind of golden crest of something that you feel would really help come to fruition. But generally, we're just looking for really good games. The market is completely changing. So,
I know in my experience, when I'm not organizing festivals, I work for doing PR and marketing stuff and other things for indie games. And I know the kind of game that makes my life easier. It's the kind of game where there's not one way to play them. I mean, a graphic adventure might be great, but there's a story and there's some puzzles, and that's pretty much it. If you don't like the story, if you don't engage with the art, the game's not for you. On the other hand, you go to a game like Mountain Blade or, Don't Starve, and they are games that you can play many different ways. You can focus on this or that one, and they are fun to watch, which is also very important. Is that also something you keep in mind? The game has to be fun to watch, the game has to appeal to different audiences, it has to have different focus points?
So, again, yes and no. Like, I am in two minds on this. Like, obviously those games where you can play them differently open up the audience that you can then push those to. But a lot of the time, I see games, and I would prefer to have a more focused, narrow vision where the team knows what they're doing, and you're clearly targeting a specific audience. And I think a good example of this is like the Souls series, right? So they're very aware of what they're doing. They're very much keeping in line with what they know their audience want, and they do that to make sure that it consistently sells and does well, and it's in line like artistically with what their fans want, and I think that's great. But they're fully aware of what they're doing and the market they're trying to hit. Whereas if you're trying to cast your net wider, you're obviously opening yourself up to more risk and more chance of not succeeding in what you're trying to do. Obviously, if you're good at doing that, it helps when you are approaching publishers or investors to try and get more money into your game. And it does become easier if you've got something good there that can be played and taken on in different ways.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps. So for titles like, Stardew Valley or Dead Cells, where you look at like the median playtime that people have, it's like, 50 hours or so. And so that definitely helps to like, people are just playing that game for a month. And obviously if someone is playing a game, they're telling their friends about it. So that definitely helps.
We've got players in Mountain Blade who have been playing the game for 2,000 hours.
Yeah,
2,000
that helps,
hours.
yeah. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
So.
I've not been with my family for 2,000 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think at least if you look at like the numbers from like the last like 1 or 2 years on Steam, from the big indie games, mostly all of them are like those titles that you can just replay over and over again in very different ways. And yeah, that really helps to make a game like really, really big. But yeah.
We're going to open the mic for people to ask questions, but I want to have the last one. Usually it's a good advice for indie devs, but let's see what you think. Unless you have funds to try different things, focus on one thing and do it really good, instead of trying to have a game with a dozen features which are not fully implemented. agree with that, or let's try everything and experiment?
I think while you're small and you're first starting out, it's definitely better to have a focus vision. It just helps you to make sure that the game that you're making is on point and it's kind of key to what either you really enjoy or what you think your audience are really going to love as well. And I think as you get bigger, you then have the opportunity to branch out more, and you can add on more features, or you can spend more time in iteration, making sure that feature sets are right for your game. But I think definitely initially, if you're starting off and you're a small team and you have a low amount of investment, focus on where you feel the fun in your game is, and push towards making that as good as it can be. Until, you know, all the bells and whistles are great, but if the core of your game isn't there and it doesn't feel like it's really gripping, and like, you know, if it's hard to pitch to someone and it's hard to explain and you can't really do it in an elevator pitch, it kind of becomes harder to do all that other stuff on top of it, I find.
Yeah, I can completely agree. So just focus on like this one thing that makes your game special and really just like polish the hell out of it, so that it's really like, if you're showing that to something, that it's totally obvious what like the special thing is about your game. It can be like the art style or some gameplay elements, or like a narrative that it's like really over the top. So yeah, it really makes sense to like focus on this one thing that makes your game really, really unique.
Brilliant. Okay, let's open the mic. Let me check. Let me walk here because I don't see a thing with this light in my face. Is there any question out there? ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta? Uy, varias. Empezamos por ahí atrás y ahora vamos moviendo hacia adelante. Si quieres hacerlo en español, les traduzco yo, o en inglés, como prefieras.
No problem. Yes, about the thing we were talking about earlier on with the Netflix model. I'm not that sure about, I mean, of course, I'm a developer, and again, I'm not that aware of the market, but seeing that, you know, Spotify, Last.fm, all these services didn't seem to help out the labels or the musicians as much as they help the platform themselves. I see so many people being really optimistic about this new model for video games, but I think we should bear in mind that Netflix came, like, everyone was like downloading movies and, you know, everything without paying, and then we turned into a paying model. But right now with video games, people are paying right now, so, and I think they're paying more than 10, 15 bucks a month for a game. I think we all do, even if we don't realize. Like on sales, we spend way more than that if you look at it on a yearly basis. So I really, I'm sure there's a way to do it, but I'm not really that optimistic that this system would benefit both publishers or devs. I'd like to have your input on that.
Yeah, so I've known devs that have gone on to stuff like Xbox Game Pass, where they've got a substantial, or Congregate, who have been given either minimum guarantees or substantial amounts of money to basically secure their rights onto that platform. I think it is really early days with them, and I think you're right. There is a danger that essentially those channels get flooded and the money doesn't flow the right way, which is to developers and the people making the games. I think it is a very early stage, and games are very different to movies. But I do think as time goes on, and it will expand a lot more, and it's about, I think with that, it's a lot about finding, again, curated content, which is some of the problems that other stores have got at the moment. There is no steadfast, this is the way it's going to work, this is the way it's not going to work, so I can't give you a kind of definitive answer on that one. But I do think as time goes on, it will do better. And you have to think, I know what you're saying, most people in this room will have spent kind of more than $15 a month. I know I have on video games, right? But if you think about the wider audience, like I know I have quite a lot of friends that will buy 3 games in the whole year, right? And it'll be FIFA, one random indie game that they like, and maybe Call of Duty. Now, if I told them they could get 12 months worth of games and they'd only have to pay £100, $150, they're more likely to jump in on that to play maybe the few that they weren't sure about that they were interested in, and then they also have access to all these other games. So I do think there is a place for it, and I do think outside of like gamers, if you want to call us guys that, there's definitely space for this model, and there's a lot more money in the market to be had.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that the thing is, we as a developer or publisher, we can't decide if this is going to work. So if someone's going to do it and it's working, people are just going to do it and use it, and we as a publisher or developer just have to get along and be on the platform because that's the place to be then. So it's basically just what the players are going to want and what they are going to use. So, but yeah, it's pretty still early to tell.
Teníamos otra pregunta por aquí.
As the Steam is very difficult right now to enter without having already some hit titles or money for marketing, what do you think of the approach to make something like a soft launch on the smaller shop, like for example GOG, and just build your community, your fan base, and then proceed to Steam?
Yeah, we've seen quite a few titles that are having like an itch.io page with just a demo on it or an early build or something. And yeah, it really helps to be early on one of the smaller platforms to just gain a community. And then, yeah, at some point you just launch your Steam page and have it on like coming soon. The people can wishlist it and so on. So that definitely can help a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think, and whether you go with a publisher, whether you self-publish or whatever, always try and get the platform holders, the store holders on board with you. So the key to this, I think, if you're trying to do an early access or you're trying to, think of it this way, you're giving someone an exclusive window, right? Don't think of it as you only want to launch on a small thing before you expand. You're giving that store an exclusive window. So how can you then work that with those guys to your advantage? And a lot of the time, they'll be able to give you help to kind of propel your game to where it needs to be. So by all means, do go with different stores. And because the market is open at the moment and because there are so many people vying for this, there's a lot more opportunity to be had if you get in contact with store holders where you can to try and push yourself forward as much as you can.
At the same time, let me step in here. You might be a bit biased here in the sense that, let me explain, that you want to publish a game on GOG, you can. Because you have direct line with them. For a small indie game, they're not that sure. The process is not really transparent. It doesn't have a schedule. They can't rely on, I'm going to publish my game on Humble Bundle or GOG before I go to Steam because they are not sure if they are going to be answered at all. I mean,
I think this is the same as everywhere, right? Unless you have to, I'm a big believer in the idea of if you don't ask, you don't get. You have to knock on doors, you have to send multiple emails, like you're not going to get responses all the time. People aren't going to talk to you, but eventually, if you keep going and you keep trying, someone will get back to you. Someone will get annoyed at seeing your email in again for the next week, and they'll take a look at your game, and if they like it, they'll get back to you. And someone will, but it's a lot of hard work, and I do understand that until you have those contacts, it can be extremely difficult. But I think it is worthwhile to keep trying with all these different platforms as much as you can, especially if you're self-publishing, to give yourself the best opportunity. And it's obviously not a fun experience because you get knocked down a lot, right? If you send 10 emails in a day and you don't get a response on that, that doesn't feel good. But if you keep going, generally I'll find someone will get back to you, and then it's getting your foot in the door. Once you've got your foot in the door, the conversation's open and you can kind of start building on that. But if you don't try and you don't keep trying, you're not going to get anywhere.
Well, we don't have time for more questions, but Mark and Kiron will be around for the show for a couple of more days on the show, so you can approach them and ask any question you might have. I'm sorry if I put you in a, in a difficult situation there. Anyway, thank you very much for participating in this panel. Please, huge round of applause.